Hey guys, hi, welcome back once again, and this time it just might be a little longer video, so please hear me out. And I think it is not about hearing me out, but it is about hearing ourselves out to understand the interconnection, the interdependence, the interrelatedness of everything to one another. So it is also about understanding the difference between studying and learning. It is also about understanding our own habits and our beliefs or our belief patterns in relation to our tribe and our communities. And our tribe and our communities are not only stuff on a larger platform, but they are also instruments that form our family, that form our religion, that form our friend circles, that form our educational institutions, that form our governments, that form a lot of other things, wherein people come together as a community, as a whole. So that whole can be WHOLE as well as HOLES. So let's try and understand it, all of it together, and how our beliefs and how our habits can be enabling, at the same time disabling, can be empowering and disempowering, can transform us or get us fixated into certain things, into certain ways of functioning. So let's try and look into both of these aspects. And a lot of people, a lot of affirmations have gone out into saying that it is your belief that makes you who you are. But it is also important to understand where our beliefs come in from. It is also important to understand where do we learn our things from, and where do we get that prescription list from. So there was this famous Dutch philosopher who had once said that life is lived forward but is learnt backwards. And in the same breath, I'd like to add that there is another quote that goes on to say that history keeps repeating itself, but man never learns from it. I would just like to edit it a little here, tweak it a little here, and I would like to add that history keeps repeating and repeating and repeating and repeating itself, and once in a while, man really learns from it. So, let's dive into this topic and let's understand where, our subjects of learning come from and where we are subjected to our learnings or our unlearnings. So if we look back into our history, our own personal history, as well as the history of human beings, we would learn a lot of things. We would see things in a different perspective, or at least we'll gather some information to start to look at things from a different perspective. And I'm talking of a different perspective over here because whatever we are going through right now with the COVID, we are beginning to look at things from a different perspective. At least most of us are trying to do that. And some of us are still wanting to go back to things as to how they used to be. So in understanding all of that, let us try to understand where we lag behind, or certain systems lag behind and they still need to catch up, wherein some systems are way ahead of their times and have left the other systems behind. So let's try and look at our personal histories, and then I'll go into the history of humanity or human beings not a very long time ago, roughly around 300 to 400 years back. So if we look into our personal history, we learn certain things from the people that are around us. We come as blank slates, and then there are certain things written for us which we start imbibing, which gets imprinted on us. And those things primarily are a certain way to be good and a certain way to be bad. which is to say that certain things will be acceptable and certain things will not be acceptable, which is the social norm, which is the standardized format of almost all institutions and all tribes that come together to make a community. So there are times, as I've addressed in my last video, that there are times when the me is not aligned with the we, and we need to understand where the certain aspects of all the me's lag behind to catch up with the we's, or where the certain aspects of we lag behind in keeping with certain aspects of all the little me's that go into the making of the we. So if you look back into our childhood or into our formative years, not even childhood, our formative years, wherein the foundation of the pillars of our lives are being laid, the roots are beginning to grow, where the seed is sown. So let's try and look into that. So when we come into this world, for the first 3 months we are actually quite unaware of most of the things. We cry when we are hungry, we cry when we crap, and we cry when we are uncomfortable, when we cry when we can't burp. So we howl so that we can be helped. And then once we start moving a little bit, once we start teething, we get a little uncomfortable. We start getting a little uncomfortable because teething is a process that really irritates. That is a very annoying process, and that is why the child keeps rubbing it and the child tries to put everything in its mouth. And then the child is told that there are certain things which are good that can be put in the mouth, and there are certain things that are unacceptable. And yet, as the child starts to move, the child wants to test its own boundaries. The child wants to know whether certain things are acceptable in certain norms, in certain conditions, or not, in certain situations or not. And that is when the child starts to put up things and then takes a peek at you to see how do you react to it. So when the child puts in a footwear, a slipper, you're going to say, no, don't do that. Take this, put this in your mouth. This is good. So the child starts to understand, oh, okay, so the me and the you are quite different. And the child is wanting to understand where is the limit of the child? Where is my limit and where is your limit? Where does my limit end and where does your begin? So, so the brain is trying to evolve at that point in time. The brain is trying to create its own identity. The brain is trying to find an identity, to see where me ends and you begin. The brain is also trying to figure out the trigger areas wherein I can be acceptable and wherein I cannot be acceptable. And roughly by the age of 2, 2.5 and 3, almost everybody lies. Almost everybody lies. And not to say that that's something bad or that's something good. It is just how it is. And the good part of that is that the child has now figured out your trigger points and its trigger points. The child is now beginning to grow into the world. The child is now preparing itself to get out into the world. And the child is learning to build its own defense mechanisms. So it begins to lie and manipulate, and they are kind of silly white lies, but they are also its defense mechanisms to understand that there are certain things acceptable about me and there are certain things that are not acceptable about me, and that I need to change it, that I need to manipulate it, or I need to lie about it, because otherwise I can be harmed and I may be threatened. But in the same breath, we all teach our kids not to lie, because lying also implies that there is bare minimal trust, that there is very little trust, and that you can't be completely yourself, that you need to have a defense mechanism for yourself, that you need to have certain boundaries, that your trust and that your whole self is questioned, There are certain parts of you that you have to disown in order to fit in order to be acceptable. So that is how it is. There is no good or bad to it. It is how we perceive it. And then even if we go back or come ahead in our own personal lives, we would understand that when we start going to school, there are certain things that we are taught. Walk in a straight line, don't be messy, don't be unruly, don't be this, don't be disobedient, don't question a lot. But unfortunately, what happens is that when we don't question a lot, we are suppressing the process of the brain functioning. We are suppressing our own selves. We are suppressing our ability to inquire, to be curious, to be more engaging and more connected. So my understanding is that when we teach a child ABCD, the alphabets, and the Hindi alphabets, I can only speak of these two languages because these are the only two languages that I know how to read and write. I can speak Marathi, but that is something not that I can read and write. So coming to ABCD, which most of the world recognizes, why does the teacher not take a breather to just question, to just inquire, take a step back and say, okay, what did you learn over here? Was there anything different? Do you agree to everything that I have taught, or is there a disagreement? Is there a conflicting viewpoint that can be brought forward so that we can address and see it in a different light? That we can all learn from it, that we may have missed. Why can't a teacher just say that? Why is it that nobody questions that the N and the Z are the same things? That H and I are exactly the same things, just written and flipped around differently? And why is it that we need to repeat these things? Because going further ahead, we will realize that we don't like repeating things, but yet we keep repeating things out of habit, out of certain beliefs. So we don't like repeating the entire year in case we fail the class or in case we fail in certain subjects. We are shamed for it. We are shamed not only in front of our teacher but in front of our peers. Our parents at times shame us. Our community shames us, calling us dumb, calling us idiots, and calling us things like, this is the only thing that you've got to do and you still can't do it. Why do we need to shame somebody? Why can't we take a breather and just, let that inquiry be there? What was it that the child did not grasp? Where did I fail? Where did I falter? And maybe the standard norms do not work for everybody because one size does not fit everybody. So maybe, if we can look into the movie Hitchki, we would also understand that there is this teacher who has a certain disability or who is differently abled, and goes on to say that what if we can change our teaching methodologies, teaching the same thing, but putting it across differently wherein it's easier and fun to learn. So the other day I had enrolled for a particular course, and I was having this talk with my daughter, and I happened to mention to her that it's so very weird that I am studying so many things, and I did not like studies at all when I was growing up. Barring a few subjects which I absolutely loved, there were a whole lot of other subjects that I did not like. So she just stopped me and she said, Mama, I don't think so anybody likes to study. We all like to learn, and there is a difference. And that struck a chord. And that was like, yes, we all like to learn. We all like to grow. We all like to evolve. We all like to become a better versions of ourselves. But we don't like studying. And studies in institutions, in any institution, is built on a standardized format. It is not custom fit. It is not custom made. For nobody has the time, nobody has the inclination, and nobody even has the interest to custom make it for you. So if we do not have that interest and that inclination, we obviously do not have that connect with each other. So let us try and see how we can connect all the things together. So even if we go back into our history, not very long back, there was a point in time, somewhere around 1750s or 1760s, where they took a revolution which was called as an industrial revolution. And that industrial revolution changed the entire system of working. But yes, there were certain institutions that were lagging behind, and there were certain institutions that had run forward. And so there was a clash in the institutions. One was being dragged and one was trying to pull it harder. So let's try and understand that. So if we take Industrial Revolution, the era before Industrial Revolution, the phase of Industrial Revolution, and the era post-Industrial Revolution and the modern times, we would understand that before Industrial Revolution, before 1750, things were more customized. They were not generalized. They were not standardized. They took longer to be made. They took longer to be produced. And most things were agriculture. Now I'm talking of things. Things were being produced. Things were being customized. And they were not being produced in bulk, in mass quantities. But production in the house was in mass quantities. So every family had roughly around 7 to 10 kids, or even more. And unfortunately, the mortality rate or the life expectancy of people before 1750 was somewhere in the range of 25 to 40. Now most people, I am assuming, would have lived till the age of 28 and 30 or 32. Now since they had a smaller life expectancy, they were obviously getting married earlier. And kids were getting married earlier, and kids were producing their own kids. And the system of arranged marriages was in place. The system of love had not crept into marriage as an institution, because marriage was meant to take the production economy, the asset economy forward. Which was to say that marriage primarily was about ensuring that the right arrangement was made between and within the same class or the same caste, and that two people who came in together produced n number of children, very likely boys if that could be done, so that the asset, the land or the kingdom stayed within the family itself. Now at that point in time, girls were again a liability, and they needed to be married off, and a dowry was supposed to be given for them. And it was also a point wherein companionship or wherein life partnership was not taken into account. That was not the norm. Growing together, evolving together was not the norm. Now came in Industrial Revolution. Now when Industrial Revolution came into the picture, the mortality rate had comparatively gone up. So it had increased by another 5 to 7 years, not much, but it had still gone up. So people were probably, far-fetched living till the age of 40 and 50. Like 50 being the highest point wherein after that you should be no more. So again, that had gone up, production in factories had gone up, and the wage scales had gone up. Now if the wages had gone up, man had started to buy more property. And again, since man had started to buy more property, it was necessary that the same production machinery was carried on inside the house. So the production inside the house and outside of the house was happening at the same rate. Or maybe just, a kid or two had declined. So from producing 10 kids, now people were producing 8 kids. But still, it was not a major drastic change. It was still an agreement of production, of handing over our assets and our liabilities to the next generation. And that is how the entire thing functioned. Then came in the second phase wherein women had started to go to factories. And yes, when Industrial Revolution came in, prior to that also, I would like to mention that kids were considered as assets. Kids were considered as miniature adults. Obviously, they were getting married so early and that they were producing their own kids. They were considered as miniature adults, as assets, because in order to toil the land, or in order to keep the factory going, or in order to keep the business going, they needed more hands. And if they needed more hands, they needed more people around. So they produced more kids. In fact, even the factories were now demanding to have more workers. So the kids were also working, probably next to their fathers and their mothers in the factory. Till very late, the labor law came in, the child labor law came in, which said that children cannot be employed in factories. And again, at that point in time, the concept of having a formal education was not there, because people needed to earn and not learn. So post-industrial era, post-industrial revolution era, now life expectancy had gone up a little more, because the pharma industries were doing very well, the agricultural industry was doing well, the production mills were doing well, the factories were doing well. So now there was a shift, and people's life expectancy had slightly risen. And people were probably getting, living up till the age of 70 and 80. Unfortunately, in the whole scheme of things, marriage was still working in the same rhythm. So the production was more or less going on in the similar manner. Even if we look into our grandfather's generation, we would know that every family had around 5 to 7 kids, 4 to 7 kids, even if we cut it down. And then the system of arranged marriage was still there, which meant that marriage was still an arrangement. Yes, the concept of love and of companionship and of life partnership was gradually seeping in, but it was still not a normal norm. The man was still the provider in the house, the woman was still the nurturer in the house, and since the production factory was still going on, man needed to be outside of the house to produce and to provide for those many more number of mouths to feed. And so he was away from the house. He was overworking, and he was doing overtime. And so it meant that the father did not have that kind of a connection, because the father never got time to engage with their own kids. But the father saw kids as an extension of himself. And if the woman was in partnership with all of these men, she obviously thought of the same thing, that they were an extension of her own self and not individuals. And that is why the law of inheritance took so long to understand and to say that women can now have equal right in the property, because marriage was still considered as a production and an asset management institution. Because if we really go back and ask grandparents or our parents, most of them have not met or had not met each other. In fact, it was the families that decided who marries whom. It was the family who chose the bride and the groom for each other. So when the two people did not know each other, the question of love and compatibility and companionship did not arise. And it was much later that these things started coming into the picture. It was much later, when women's rights were being started to acknowledge, when children's rights were being started to acknowledge, that society started to transform, that society started to change a bit, that the definition of marriage underwent change. Not completely, but it had started going under a certain change. So if we look at things in a more holistic way, we would understand that all of these things are interconnected and interrelated and interdependent, and they impact and influence one another. No system is separate from the other system. No individual, no me is separate from the we. The me and the we are mirror reflections of each other. And unless we are willing to grow and transform and evolve together, unless the me and the we transforms together, unless the me and the we change together, some part of us will always be lagging behind, trying to catch up with the other. And some part of us will be running so ahead in time when compared to the other institutions that it would be out of breath very early. That one tire would puncture out, would deflate, if all of the tires of the wheels are not in alignment. We will be running on empty. So I'm not against standardized things or standardized notions. I think they are a requisite to running things wherein so many billions have come into the picture. But it is also important to understand that there are times when standardized things, when generalized things, or when generalized concepts need to be tweaked and edited so that the me and the we evolve together, so that none of us lag behind, so that none of the systems lag behind, that it should not be that the me gets unheard of because of the we, that the me has a fallout from the me itself to accommodate itself into the me, or that the we collapses completely and all the me's have to build it again together, to start from the scratch. So unless we stop and inquire, and unless we question, and unless we see the integratedness of all of these things coming together, a part of us will always be running ahead, and a part of us will always be lagging behind. A part of us will be running so fast ahead that it will be out of breath, panting itself out, and the other half will still be lagging behind. And I don't think so we like to run on empty. I don't think so we like to run on deflated tires. So let's try and understand that if all of these things are interconnected and interdependent and interrelated and coexist together and need to coexist together, we need to stop every few years. We can decide that for ourselves and to re-examine how everything else impacts and affects everybody. Is it leading to a total growth? Is it leading to an evolution? Or is it holding us back? Is it helping us grow into better versions of ourselves, or are we compromising ourselves to keep fitting into a size that may not fit us? So let's try and do that more often, and I will see you once again next week. Till then, stay connected.